I'm happy to introduce Ken Lardie tonight. Incidentally, it's his birthday. Ken is going to talk to us about his family's history on the Old Mission Peninsula. They've been here for 5 generations. Ken was born on the peninsula. Well, actually, he was born in the hall at Munson Medical Center, but he lived his childhood and went to the Mapleton School on the peninsula. He then went to St. Francis High School and to seminary at New Canaan University in Pittsburgh. Before he returned to Old Mission Peninsula, he met and married his wife. In his adult life, he's done many things. Mostly he's been a farmer here. He's also a fine cabinet maker, and you can look around here in the Township Hall and see examples of his fine cabinet making ability. Welcome, Ken.
There was an Alec Lardie that opened a store not that far north of Mapleton, and right where the telephone office used to be. And I had burned down. At first I thought maybe they were confusing that with the one that George started, well actually P.F. Lardie started at Mapleton. But according to the writing, the one that Alec built had a dance hall upstairs. Well, the one Watson never had a dance hall upstairs. So, and that place burned down. So apparently the retail is kind of in the Lardies' blood. And some of you might know my son Aaron, who works at the grocery store in Mapleton. And he's worked in retail ever since he got out of college. First with Whole Foods in Ann Arbor, and then with Stadium Hardware in Ann Arbor. And he just seems to gravitate back to retail, which maybe there's something in the genes. So in picture 1, I wanted to show that was the Bars Harbor Grocery. I can barely remember it. And this picture are my 2 sisters and my dad. Obviously, he was on home before he shipped out or whenever he had to go. And I have other pictures of my dad in that uniform. And the other pictures, he doesn't look very happy. So I chose this one because he has a pleasant look on his face. It wasn't a real pleasant part of his life. He was married, had 3 kids, and it was very difficult. But I kind of like to see the fact that you can see what that store looked like at one time. I have very, very few memories of that, and I'm not sure if they're memories or they're just more like dreams. Okay, picture 2, Mike and Annie. Now, when I was young, 10, 11, 12, in that period, I was the one that, now this house here was over on Blue Water Road, where my sister Judy and her ex-husband Ray built a house, and it's now owned by somebody else. But that's what was there. And I was sent over there to help Uncle Mike, because in this picture he doesn't have canes, but by the time I knew he had to have 2 canes to get around with. So I was sent over to chop firewood, feed the cats, and listen to his stories. And he had a lot of great, wonderful stories. And most of my stories come from him. And I hope he enjoyed these. And now Uncle Mike, in his lifetime, was a horse trainer and a horse trader. But those were, I understand, common skills and professions back in that day. And he talks about the best horse trade he ever made was in the middle of East Bay. Now, if you were a class of 6th graders, I asked you to try to figure out how could it be that he traded horses out in the middle of East Bay. But you are cognizant of our local history. And back in the day, before we had good roads in the wintertime, it was much easier to go across the ice to Elk Rapids to get your coffee and your sugar and your flour and your whiskey or whatever else you were going to get over there and come back. And Mike said that particular day he had a sled full of firewood, and he was going over there to sell the firewood. It was something they did to make a couple extra bucks. And about halfway across he met a guy coming from Elk Rapids with an empty sled coming over here to cut firewood. Now you guys probably know why the guy was coming over here to cut firewood and not cutting it in Elk Rapids. Because what happened in those days, it didn't take too many winters around the village for they cut all the trees down. and there wasn't anything left. So they would, and it was much easier to go across the ice and go someplace to cut wood than it was to try to go out what roads they had. Well, as typical back in those days, the tradition was you met somebody, you stopped and talked. And to pass the news, was there any open water anywhere, you know, what was going on. They got chit-chatting, and the guy liked his team, he liked the other guy's team, so they swapped teams, sleds, and load of lumber. And Uncle Mike came back with the empty sled, and the other guy went back to Elk Rapids with the sled full of firewood. Now, I don't know if that's a testimony to Lardie shrewdness or to just humanity's laziness. But that's what he said was the best team he ever had. And he had done a lot of horse trading and horse training. And there's a lot of other stories. He told me about that, but I could go on forever. But one of the memorable things, Uncle Mike wasn't a bad sort, but somehow he was the brunt of a lot of tricks. Now, as you could tell in my family, there was a lot of kids there, and Halloween came. It was back when they really did trick or treat. And so, one of the nasty little tricks that kids would do was they'd go to the outhouse, pick it up, and move it back 2 feet. Okay, so that when the person came out, and they would step into the poop hole instead of, well, they did this to Uncle Mike one year. Well, the next year, Uncle Mike was still mad about it, so he went out, got in the outhouse, he had a lantern and a shotgun with him. Okay, well, the kids could figure it out pretty quick, so they went behind and tipped it over on its face with Uncle Mike locked and stuck inside of it. I guess they caught a lot of grief for poor Uncle Mike stuck in that outhouse the rest of the night. But I heard somewhere that this other prank might have made the news. But this had been, of course, when Uncle Stan was getting older, and my dad, of course, was a youngster, and there was Leslie involved. And they went over to Uncle Mike's, and Mike had a cutter, I guess you might call it, but a little, I don't know, a small horse trailer. I don't know the terminology. Well, being young, stupid, and ambitious, they took it apart quietly, put a ladder up, a cinch ladder up against the barn, and took it piece by piece up on top of the barn, and put it back together up on top of the barn, and then down, and went home. And of course, Mike comes out the next day, and here's his prize Surrey up there on top of the barn. And I guess the boys caught a little bit of problems with that too. So I have to say they weren't all innocent. Now, with Aunt Annie, God bless her, I don't know, Mike I guess was hard on wives, but that was the fourth one. And, but she was always nice to us. Annie was a little special, okay? Today, I don't know what the neurological problems were, but she got along with kids. And she always had, stuff for us, candy, cookies, Christmas presents. But the one story I remember was one day she had a push lawnmower and it needed sharpening. So she took it to town, pushed it to town, to the hardware store to get it sharpened. Boy, they were hardy ladies back in those days. I can also remember when they got old and they had to be, I think they were out in the Warman Valley Hospital. I think that was like a nursing home. And Dad, to be nice, brought them home to visit the old place, which was really nice until the end of the day and they had to go back. I was just a kid, but I remember that was very difficult on everybody involved. Okay, picture 3. Okay, that's the clan. The man in the back with the beard, that's Oliver. Okay, and Charles, well, I should have a pointer here. See the little boy at the left? That's my dad. Right behind him is Charles. And I've got that picture here somewhere. I don't know if it's all that important to point out every name, but you see here, there was a Michael and the child. That would be the one on the far, that side. That was Michael and the child. And then in front of him was Roy Umler, Mary's husband. And then down below him on the ground there was Francis Lardie, who died young. In the back, of course, was the grand old man, Oliver. And then I mentioned the little boy, my dad. Behind him is Charles. Behind him is Kitty Lardie, Catherine Lardie. And if you look at the pictures there, to Charles's, his left, our right, are the two brothers, Stanley and Leslie. And as I was doing this research, I really come to realize that I didn't know these people. And I kind of wished I would have. Particularly as I went through things, I kind of wished I would have known Leslie. As I saw his pictures and I did the studying of this stuff, I kind of wished that he would have been a part of my life. Okay. Picture 5. Okay, that's the crew there. Of course, the old man in the back is Charles, and then in front of him is, I think the one closest to him is Leslie, and then Stanley, and then Oakley, and then Catherine, I think. Okay, and one of the things that I wanted to talk about here is the tragedy that struck that family. But they never in that picture died of tuberculosis, except for the youngest, except for my dad, who's looking down, because he hated milk. My dad would not drink milk. Milk got into the cat, got into the milk. Tuberculosis got into the milk, and it killed all the boys, including the girl, Catherine. And my dad was spared simply because he hated milk, and he wouldn't drink it. He never would drink milk. He hated two things. He hated milk and he hated scrambled eggs. The scrambled eggs reminded him of those powdered eggs they served him in the South Pacific and the Navy, and he couldn't stand those things. But if you look at Charles, you can see he looks like a Lardie. And one of the interesting things I found out as I was doing this research, after looking at all these pictures, it started kind of imprinting on my mind. You started seeing the familiar faces and the familiar characteristics that never really kind of imprinted on my mind. And I did want to share, as I close up this sad section here, make sure I got this going right here. Picture 6. That's Catherine. And I kind of center on her. I don't know how many of you know my sister Judy, but if you had known Judy at that age, you would swear they looked. You could have convinced me that was a picture of Judy. And I don't know what her personality was like, but from the obituaries or in the paper, one particularly in the high school paper by her fellow students, that I suspect she had that easygoing, happy kind of personality that my sister Judy has. But she died at age 17. And that was picture 6. And that's the obituary for Catherine. And she was a junior at the high school, and she died, they said, toboggan accident. Somehow the tuberculosis got into the bone, and that killed her. And that's my little buddy that I come to like. That's Leslie. just to finish up this kind of sad part of the presentation, on the back of this picture of him is writing, and this I could tell was my grandma's writing. If I could have one wish granted, it would be to have the family circle together. However, thy will be done. 1937. And it was only 3 years later her husband was stepped on by a horse and died. So that lady had a lot of tragedy in her life. I didn't want that one. I'm ahead of myself. I thought I had a picture of Stanley in there. I want to talk about Stanley a little bit, because Stanley, now, as it happened with my grandmother, because of the tragedies in her life and how things were, she wasn't exactly the warmest human being on the face of the earth. But we got along great. And she told me a lot of stories. What was interesting is most of the stories were about Stanley. And Stanley died in his 30s at a sanatorium. And it really, really did break her heart. Okay, this is our family wedding picture. The ones in the center, of course, are my mom and dad. On this side is Ray Carroll, and some of you probably knew him. And on the other side was a Mary Cosworth, who, from the conversations and stories from my mom, was indeed my mother's best friend. I don't know what happened to her in life. Picture 9. Now, it's hard to tell what house that is. That's my sister Nancy. But that's the Golden Tower down on Iman Road. And Pat and John Marshall spent a good deal of their lives there. Now, the reason I know that is I did a lot of work on that house. I can tell it just by looking at it. I basically almost redid the whole house over the years. And, but that's where we lived when they were first married. One of the places. And I just wanted to point out that that was a part of our family at one time. I think my mother said that she really scandalized some of the neighbors because she was getting ready to make a nice dinner for her husband. And the chickens were out there wandering around, so she went and hired a .22 rifle and went out and shot one of them through the head and dragged it in, and that wasn't too ladylike. My mother was not known for being too ladylike, but she had been on the shooting team in high school, so she knew how to shoot. Okay, I want to talk. Now, I'm back to the Harbor Grocery, because my folks bought the Harbor Groceries back in the 30s, and I mentioned that they also bought Pete Lardie's grocery up the top of the hill and closed it so that they weren't competing. And it was during the wartime that Eileen Lardie, who was Jack's mom, who passed away a few years ago, that she came into our family as a foster child because my mom needed help, because she had the 2 girls and myself. And Eileen ended up marrying another member of the family, a John Lardie, and that's how we got that group of Lardies around here. So, I don't think they had transportation problems back then, but they managed to find a Lardie to marry. Now, interesting story is, oh my goodness, time is going on here real fast.
Oh, don't worry.
We're okay? I know my wife's here, so if I'm talking to her, she'll let me know. Okay. I love this picture because it's what it was like back then, you know? A little crude, a little messy, but it was what it was. And I can remember very little about that store except when you went in, there was a counter that was back before self-service. And I can remember barely Jack's mom working there, and because as a little kid they had to reach up and pull the boxes down. I thought that was the coolest thing. You know, you reach up there with that little stick with the wire and pull a box of cornflakes off the top.